never really know what you're going to see when you're out on the road. For the most part, you hope that it's just going to be a normal day with very little traffic, but every now and then you see something that's almost indescribable. When I was a cross-country truck driver in the United States about 10 years ago, I loved the freedom that came with the job, but I hated when I was forced to sleep or stay overnight in sketchy-looking areas. And I will never forget the time that I was so freaked out that I decided to leave a truck stop and drive to the next one a few miles away while I was half asleep because of what I saw. It was the middle of the night, and I was driving a load from Oregon across the country to North Carolina, so it was the second day of driving, and even though I had gotten a few hours of sleep the night before, I was absolutely beat. I remember looking at the clock and seeing that it was 11:30 p.m., and I decided that I was going to pull over at the next rest station or truck stop that I saw and get a few hours of sleep. And after deciding to look for some place to park, I ended up driving for another 10 to 20 minutes before finally seeing a truck stop. So by the time I was pulling in, I swear I could feel my eyelids closing on me. Now, for the most part, nothing scared me more than driving while tired. I had seen too many accidents happen on the road because drivers fell asleep behind the wheel, and I never wanted that to be me. So I was very much looking forward to parking the truck and calling it a night. But as I pulled into the truck stop, I noticed a series of flickering lights coming from the grassy field next to the restrooms. And as I got closer and my truck lights shined onto it, I realized that it wasn't lights that I was seeing, they were candles. I slowed my truck down to a complete stop and squinted my eyes to focus my vision on the field, and I was shocked to see 3 people standing around one of the picnic tables outside of the restroom. All 3 of them were wearing dark clothing with hoods covering their faces to the point where I couldn't even make out whether or not they were male or female, and they were all just standing there around a few lit candles. That was when I noticed something shiny on the table beside them, and when I realized what it was, I immediately took my truck out of the parked position and started figuring out my best way out of that truck stop. Sitting on the table next to the hooded figures was what looked like a knife. As I slowly backed my truck up to position it in a way that I could pull out the truck stop and back onto the road, I noticed that 3 people turned to face my truck. One of them started to walk toward me, and that walk slowly transitioned to them running as I continued to move my truck. Thankfully, I managed to put it into drive and start pulling out the truck stop before they made it to the passenger side. But as I looked back through the rearview mirror, I could see one of the hooded figures standing in the parking lot as the light from my brakes bathed them in red. After leaving the first truck stop, I drove as fast as I could to the next one that I could find. Thankfully, it was close enough to where I didn't fall asleep behind the wheel, but far enough away from whatever I had just stumbled on at the other rest stop for me to feel safe enough to finally get some sleep. Granted, I definitely woke up multiple times through the night because I thought I was hearing things, but the truck stop I ended up at had 2 other trucks there, so I felt a bit more secure. I still can't even begin to explain what I saw that night. All I know is that I'm glad I kept driving. As a truck driver, I learned from the guy that I rode with when I first started that above all else when on the road, you have to respect other drivers, especially other truckers. And that's because unlike most other drivers, we understand the mechanics of these massive rigs that we are driving around, so we know how much room is needed to properly stop and whatnot. On top of that, we also know how stressful a full day of driving can be, so a little bit of courtesy always goes a long way. However, sometimes other drivers on the road don't always extend you that same courtesy, and things can start to get a bit dicey. There was this one night when I was on a trip from New Jersey to Florida, and I had slept through the entire day with my plans being to drive throughout the night when there was less traffic on the road. To my surprise though, about 20 minutes into my drive I ended up behind another truck that had Florida plates on it, so I assumed that it would be smart to keep my pace with this driver. I didn't want to risk passing them on the small 2-lane highway that we were on, just in case the driver was feeling tired or something. However, I suppose he didn't like having another truck behind him or something, because he kept throwing his flashers on, and then at one point I even saw his arm come out of his window, as if he was trying to signal for me to pass him. So that's exactly what I did. I ended up moving over into the left lane and proceeded to speed up. However, as the cab of my truck aligned itself with him, I noticed that he was speeding up to match my pace. I didn't like that one bit, and then I looked over and saw that he was yelling out of his window toward me. Now I didn't want the situation to escalate any further, so I decided to ease up on the gas and slowly let the other driver get ahead of me. But as I began to slow down, I could hear him blaring his horn at me. Then out of nowhere, he started veering into my lane, causing me to have to veer onto the shoulder as I continued to slow down. I tried to get my horn going, but I doubt he could have heard it over his own that was still blaring loudly, and as he continued to transition into the left lane, I had nowhere else to go. I slammed on my brakes hoping to make it out of the jam in time, but I wasn't so lucky. The driver continued to force me off the road, and as I ran into the guardrail, it wasn't strong enough to hold back the massive truck that I was forced to crash into it with. After crashing into the guardrail, I was sent slowly coasting down the side of the highway into a ditch. Thankfully, the truck didn't roll or anything. Once I reoriented myself and was able to focus a bit, I grabbed my phone out of my pocket and began calling the police to report the incident. And I was so focused on my phone that I didn't notice that the other driver must have stopped further up the road, because before I knew it, I heard the sound of something slamming up against my passenger side window. I looked over and saw that it was the other driver, and he was screaming at the top of his lungs for me to get out of the truck. But not like he wanted to help me, but instead because he seemed like he wanted to hurt me. Even though it was dark, I could visibly see the veins popping out of his face as he continued to yell and slam his fist against the window. He periodically tried to open the passenger door, but I had locked it before I even started driving that night, so there was no way he was getting to me. Thankfully, the police arrived and managed to arrest the other driver. After doing a search of his truck, they found out why he was acting so irate. Right in the passenger seat, they found a residue scattered around that they believe was a narcotic, and they found a pipe inside the driver's pocket. At the end of the day, I was thankful to be alive and glad that maniac was finally off the road. But sadly, my truck had to be towed out of there, and that ended up going on my record, which if you're a driver, you know is never good. As a trucker who ran shipments over the border between the United States and Mexico, you get used to a lot of things that normal travelers might find bothersome. Like I know a lot of my friends hated the few times that they had to go through the customs station at the border, and I even had one who complained about getting his car searched. As a truck driver though, that's sort of part of the process. It's not like they shook me down every time I drove through, but it was a standard procedure to have the vehicle checked out by a dog, and I had to have all my paperwork for myself and the shipment ready at all times. It was something I got used to very quickly. Honestly, the hardest part of these deliveries for me was always whenever I saw a random car or series of cars parked on the side of the street. That's what most people should be concerned about when driving around Mexico, especially if you have cargo that someone might find profitable. I found that out one night. I had just dropped off a shipment in a small town just across the border and was on my way back to the US, and by that point it was about 9 at night, so I figured getting through the border would be quick and easy. The problem I had though was getting to the border. As I drove down the road, I noticed a dark green panel van that had its hazard lights on, and as I approached it I began to slow down just to make sure that I wasn't going to hit anything. That was when I noticed standing just a little bit in front of the van was a woman who was waving her arms as if she was trying to flag me down. Now, I had always been a helper. Anytime I ever saw someone on the side of the road, I always feel compelled to help, so that's what I did. I drove a bit past the woman's van and pulled off to the side of the road. And as I hopped out of the truck, I could see that the woman was walking toward me quickly, and she was speaking Spanish at a pace that I couldn't understand. And I'm bilingual, so I normally didn't run into this problem. I asked her, "What's wrong? How can I help?" in Spanish. At which point she slowed down a bit and said something along the lines of, "I popped a tire and my babies are in the car. We don't have any water. Can you please help?" And I said, of course. I told her that I had water in my truck and grabbed a few bottles before walking toward the van to inspect her tire to see if I could possibly patch it or possibly replace it if she had a spare. It was pretty dark out, especially with the lack of streetlights in that area, so I couldn't make out exactly what it was, but as I got close to the van, I could have sworn I saw something moving around on the other side. I turned to ask the woman if she had anyone there with her, but she didn't answer at all. I was a bit confused by the lack of response, but I just assumed I hadn't spoken proper Spanish and she just didn't understand what I was asking. I tried not to pay it any mind, but I definitely wish I had. As I got closer to the van, I quickly realized that I had been tricked when there wasn't a baby in the car. Instead, a man hopped out the open side door and tried to lunge toward me. I quickly turned to run around, but that was when I realized what the movement I had seen on the other side of the van was. Another man had come around from the front side of the van and by the time I turned around to run back to my truck, he was in my way and struck me in the face with a metal bar of some sort. Blood poured down my face from the open wound where I was struck, and I could hardly see as it started to pool near my eyes. All I could tell was that one of them was reaching through my pockets looking for the keys to my truck. Once they had them, I heard one or two of them run toward the truck, and the other one started up the van that must not have had a popped tire because it drove right off. After they left, I managed to get myself up and walk down the road until I finally saw another set of headlights heading in my direction. The family that picked me up was very nice and drove me directly to the border, where I was tended to and I reported my truck stolen. There, I was able to call my sister, who sent her fiancé to come and pick me up. Thankfully, the truck was empty when they stole it, and the company's insurance covered most of the cost of the truck itself, so I was able to keep my job. But as soon as I could transfer away from border deliveries, I did, that's for sure. When you first start out as a trucker, you have to do what's sort of like an apprenticeship, where you drive along with an experienced driver who shows you everything that you need to know to properly handle such a large vehicle. For the most part, from what I hear, people don't mind the apprenticeship, and the person they end up driving with is really cool. That wasn't the case for me, and honestly the first person I rode with probably should have never had his license in the first place. Not because he was a bad driver though, but because he wasn't the most upright person I'd ever met, and that was made clear on my very first trip with him. Instead of just driving with him for the day and going home like more apprentice positions, the company that I was trying to work for wanted me to run an overnight delivery as my first lesson. I met up with the man who was training me at the site. His name was Ricky, and he introduced himself very quickly before he started throwing out questions about the daily inspection procedure that you need to run on your trucks before you start driving. And I liked that. It made me feel like he was actually going to make sure I knew my stuff. After that, it wasn't long before we began our shipment, and I saw right away that he was an experienced driver. But things started to take a shifty turn when he asked me if I cared where we slept. Now I figured we would just park at a truck stop or something like that, so I told him that it didn't matter to me. I regretted that decision as the night came, and I saw that he was taking the truck on some sort of dirt path that led behind some abandoned-looking warehouse buildings. I was definitely put off by the location that we chose to stop at, so I asked him why he chose her, and he responded by saying that the last time he stayed at the truck stop in this area, he was robbed by a junkie. I didn't quite understand how this place was any safer, but I figured it was no big deal and just got ready to hop onto the super small top bunk in the cab. Looking back on it, I should have asked more questions. As the night went on, Rick was sleeping heavily. At least that's what it seemed like by the sound of his snoring. But I was having a hard time falling asleep because every time I came close, I would hear a noise that sounded like someone or something walking outside of the truck. At one point, I even heard what sounded like something moving around in the back of the truck with the shipment. At that point, I woke Ricky up and told him that I thought someone was breaking into the back of the truck, but he assured me that it was just the sound of the truck settling. He didn't pay it a second thought before he went back to sleep. As for me, on the other hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I got hardly any sleep that night, and by the time we hit the road the next day, I could barely keep my eyes open. However, I was awake to notice the multiple police cars that we passed as we made our way down the road, and I was surprised when I saw they all pulled out behind our truck. Before they even turned their lights on, I heard Ricky say a single word: "Damn." The officers turned on their sirens and pulled the truck over, and thankfully Ricky didn't try to run. The cops came to both of our windows with their weapons drawn and demanded that we get out of the truck. I listened without any issue, and as they put me into handcuffs, I asked them what was going on. But when I saw the dogs, I realized that the noises I heard the night before were people in the back of the truck. The officers searched the shipment and ended up finding a large amount of cocaine that Ricky had apparently agreed to transport for a group of people in that area. The police had been monitoring the distribution process for months, and thankfully the company was able to prove that they had just hired me, so I didn't end up getting charged with anything. Ricky, on the other hand, found himself facing almost 10 years in prison and lost his license, which, as I said, is probably for the better. I feel like, for the most part, hitchhikers get a bad reputation, and I only say that after years of driving an 18-wheeler around and in the process picking up people in need. For the most part, The people you pick up are just a little bit down on their luck and can use a hand. That being said, it is a scary world out there, and you never really know what a person is like until you get to spend some time with them. So perhaps it is better safe than sorry. I'll never forget when I was on my way from Washington to Tennessee. It was a 2-day drive, and toward the end of the first day, I saw a young man on the side of the road walking with his head down. I decided to slow down beside him and ask him if he needed a ride to the nearest phone or gas station, and he was very grateful about it. After introducing himself as Marcus, he hopped into the truck and again thanked me for offering him a ride. We began to make our way down the road, and I asked him where he was heading, and surprisingly enough, he said that his end goal was Nashville. And when I told him that I was heading to a town that was about an hour away, we figured that I might as well take him as far as I could. As we drove, we both spoke about our families, and he mentioned that he had a daughter that he was actually trying to get home to, and I figured that I was doing a really good thing by helping this kid out. Little did I know that underneath the surface, this young man had a monster dwelling. The night went on and we needed to get some rest, so I pulled into one of the rest stops that had a bathroom and some vending machines to grab some snacks. I didn't need anything to eat, but Marcus ran to the bathroom and grabbed a soda for himself. I set up the extra small sleeping bed on the floor for him to try to get some sleep on, but I was surprised when it took him a while to get back. I started to think that something might have happened to him, so I decided to go and check on him in the bathroom. But as I got out of the truck, I noticed that he was making his way back toward it. I couldn't tell what exactly it was, but there was something different about him. He seemed a bit more high-strung and was moving a lot faster than he was before, and when we got into the truck, it was like he couldn't go a second without talking. I had seen signs of this before, and as a driver, I can't have drugs in my vehicle, so I had to ask Marcus if he took anything while he was in the bathroom, and he didn't like that question. He immediately became red in the face with rage and started yelling at me in a deep, threatening voice that I had no right to ask him if he did drugs. I tried to calmly explain to him that it could put my job in jeopardy and that I had to ask because something was clearly off. But before I could finish talking, he lunged toward me with both of his arms extended and his hands reaching toward my throat. I was able to push him back and throw him off me with ease, but as he stumbled backward into the front of the cab, he grabbed my metal coffee mug and used it as a small club, hitting me repeatedly. I tried to cover my head with my arms, but I could only block out so much before a solid hit to my head knocked me unconscious. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, Marcus was sitting in the passenger seat looking around frantically. He was talking to himself, and it was as if he had lost all sense of sanity. All I remember hearing him mutter was the word kill over and over again in his rambling, and as I looked around, I made sure to move slowly to not get his attention. That was when I saw the mug he had used to attack me, and decided that was probably my best bet in getting out of there alive. I quickly sat up, at which point my ears began to ring like crazy, possibly from being unconscious and sitting up too quickly. But I couldn't waste time, so I grabbed for the mug, and as hard as I could, I swung it at Marcus's head. He was dazed by the first hit, which gave me the opportunity to open the passenger door and push him out of it before locking it. I quickly pulled out my emergency phone and used it to call the police, who managed to get there before Marcus fled. They arrested him after hearing both sides of our stories and seeing that he was clearly intoxicated. Afterward, they inspected me to see if I should go to the hospital, but the officer was pretty sure I was fine, and since I felt okay, I decided to just sleep it off and got back to work the next morning.